Hi and welcome to the Unquendor Guitars workshop. My name is Daniel and today I'm going to start building a new guitar. In my previous video I made a couple of templates for a new guitar model, and if you haven't seen that video there's a link. But I have to be honest with you, after looking at the headstock and at the neck for a couple of days, I wasn't really happy with the shape. So I came up with a new shape. I made a set of new templates. So that's what I'm going to use today and start working on the neck. So, but first things first, I've got my beautiful flamed maple black limba laminated neck with ebony stripes in between the types of wood. First thing I have to do is make sure it's absolutely straight and flat. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to check it with my straight edges, some squares, and if needed I'm going to use my plane to flatten at least one side of the neck blank. Now with my neck blank flat and dead straight, I want to give you a quick little tip, and after a job like this it's time to reward yourself with a cup of coffee. So the next step is to find the center line of the neck blank using my protractor, and after drawing in the center line I'm going to draw out the shape of the neck using my template as a guide. Now with the center line drawn out on the neck blank as well as the shape of the entire neck, I can figure out where to place my truss rod. I like to keep the head of the truss rod, where the nut is, flush with the nut of the guitar neck. So I can place it right here, and I can mark out the length for the channel I need to route on this side, and I can also mark out which section of the channel needs to be a bit wider to allow for the size of the head of the truss rod. I can also mark out the length for the truss rod access channel in the headstock, and I always like to keep just a bit of wood underneath the nut. You could route the channel all the way through, it's mostly done, but I like to keep just a little bridge of wood underneath the nut just to make sure the nut has a nice contact area when the guitar is done. So yeah, everything is marked out. I've got the length of the truss rod channel, truss rod access channel is marked out, and I'm going to route this with an 8mm wide bit. Same goes for the section of the channel where the truss rod head is going to be, and the rest is going to be routed out with a 6mm router bit, approximately 9mm deep, so I get a nice and snug fit for my truss rod. So I've set up my routing jig, and I use a very basic jig. It's just a piece of multiply with a big opening in the center and two aluminum fences to a fixed width according to my router base. And on the bottom there are two aluminum angle pieces clamped to the neck blank, and with these four bolts at each side I can perfectly center the jig to the center of the neck blank and to the center line, of course. And I already tested ever so slightly with a very shallow cut that my jig is indeed in the center of the neck blank. And now I'm ready to route out the first part, the 6mm width channel for the truss rod. Now a quick little tip on how to set the tap stop on a Triton router for the truss rod channel. I use the micro adjustment for the Triton router to lower the router bit until it touches the neck blank, and of course including the router jig, and using the depth stop on these Triton routers and the truss rod itself, I can now easily set the depth, and now I can route the channel to the correct depth and I don't have to do any measurements at all. So the truss rod channel is routed and now I have to use some chisels to square off the ends and make sure the truss rod fits nice into the channel. Alright, I've cleaned up the edges as good as I can using chisels. Now I should have a good fit for the truss rod. And it should be in real tight, but not as tight that you have to force it in, but it has to be in tight. Something like this. And make sure it's flush with the top of your neck blank. Yeah, and it looks good. One truss rod channel done. So I made a mistake. Luckily I spotted it in time. When I planed down the surface of the neck blank, I checked if it was square with the sides, and it was, but unfortunately it wasn't square to the two stripes of my laminated neck, and it's much more important to have your surface square to the rest of your laminate than it is to the sides of your neck blank. Luckily I spotted it in time. I always double and triple check my work before I commit to anything. Thus, luckily for me, it's still a nice and square neck blank. So now I have to plane down the surface again and make sure it's perpendicular to my two laminate stripes. Maybe I have to deepen out the truss rod channel a little, but yeah, luckily my jig still fits the neck blank. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do off camera. Yeah, and I'll be back with you once I've fixed my mistake and I'm ready to cut out the shape on the bandsaw. So making mistakes is okay, it's a big part of making anything, but especially in building guitars, you will make a mistake, and it's the way you handle the mistake, and if you can spot and fix a mistake, that makes all the difference. Yeah, I can't pressure this enough, I can't say this enough. Yeah, always double check and triple check what you've done before you proceed to the next step. Yeah, I fixed my mistake. It's now nice and square and perpendicular to the laminate. I've deepened the truss rod channel, remarked the center line, redraw the neck shape. So now I'm ready to go to the bandsaw to cut out the main shape of the guitar neck and headstock. But before I start cutting, I always make sure I've set up my bandsaw correctly. So that's my tip for cutting out anything on a bandsaw. Make sure you've tuned it and you're ready to go. Make a couple of test cuts, especially on these long straight cuts for the sides of the neck and some of the tighter corners for your headstock. Make sure your bandsaw is cutting correctly before you start cutting your neck. So the neck is all cut out on the bandsaw, and now I'm going to use the spindle sander just to clean up the edges of the headstock some more and get as close to the line as I dare on my spindle sander, just to prevent the router table from catching and creating any tear outs on the neck. Yeah, the sides are already as close to the line as I dared with my bandsaw. It's less than a millimeter of what I need. So that's perfect. So yeah, let me go to the spindle sander, clean up especially the headstock some more, and then go to the router table to finalize the neck shape. I'm ready to start routing. I've attached my template to the neck blank using the masking tape and super glue trick. And if you've seen previous videos of mine or other guitar building videos on YouTube, I think it's a familiar trick how to use masking tape and super glue to attach a template to a workpiece. I've set up my router with a large 16mm diameter router bit with a guide bearing on the bottom. And I also like to slow down my router ever so slightly. I'm using a Triton router in my router table, and I've set it to the 4th setting. It goes up to 5 and I slowed it down to the 4th setting. And I believe this gives me more control and a smoother cut and smoother cutting action with my router table using a fairly large router bit. Yeah, that's it. The only thing left to do is fire up the router table and route out the final shape of this neck. Oh, before I start, I remembered there's a very important thing I forgot to mention. Although I have less than a millimeter to take off my neck, I'm still going to do several very shallow passes with my router table. I've seen a lot of videos and I heard a lot of stories of people having huge tear outs when routing a neck or a body at a router table, and most of the time it has to do that they are trying to take off too much material in one go. So I'm going to make very light shallow passes until I'm all the way around and I get a feeling for the wood. And yeah, I'm going to go round and round until the entire neck is flush with the template. Here we go. So I'm done routing and I didn't get any tear out whatsoever. There's just a minor rust spots from the flamed maple, but I can clean this up easily and it's going to be in a neck joint, so that's no problem at all. I've got a nice fitting truss rod, so I'm very pleased with all the results I got today. Yeah, the coming week I'll be starting the headstock break angle, the fretboard, and maybe even radiusing it and an inlay. I don't know how much time I have this week, but yeah, you'll see in next week's video. Yeah, if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, it really helps out. And if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing to don't miss out on my upcoming content. Speaking of upcoming content, this series will be similar to the previous series I did, building the Morinessa. And that's because I build guitars one at a time. So yeah, all the videos I make will be during the build of a single guitar. I'm going to do this a bit more, I'm going to do this less in depth than I did the Morinessa, but if you have any topics you want me to address during this build, yeah, make sure to let me know well in advance in the comment section down below if there's any topic you want me to explain more in depth, so I can make a note of it and try to incorporate it in the upcoming videos. Yeah, that's it for this week's update. I hope you liked it and I hope to see you in the next video. But until then, have a nice week.